Hello, everyone. In this session, we want to talk about the Global Catalog Server. What is a Global Catalog Server? Well, the Global Catalog Server is a domain controller that actually hosts the global catalog. What is it? The global catalog is a partial read-only copy of all the objects in the forest. Now let's look at a scenario that explains this concept. Before we do that, I want to remind you of the installation screen that you have here. When we were installing Active Directory domain services, one of the screens, when we promoted the server to the domain controller, contain the domain controller capabilities. If you would remember, we had said that DNS was necessary for the installation of Active Directory. Well, the global catalog server, as you can see, is also ticked off. So you can actually see this during the installation of Active Directory domain services when we promoted the server to a domain controller. Let's go to our scenario now. Here we have a forest. A forest consists of domains. We have three domains here. Domain A, which is the root domain, meaning this is the first domain controller that was installed, DC1. Then we have another domain, domain B, with a third domain, domain C. Notice that the domains have more than one domain controller. Microsoft actually recommends that you install more than one domain controller within your domain. And that's mostly for replication purposes, because when you have a second domain, all the data from the first domain controller will replicate to the second domain controller and to all the other domain controllers within the forest. Now, DC1 is the first domain controller that was installed. And when a domain controller is installed, as you saw on that installation screen, the global catalog also gets installed on that very first domain controller. Now, your domain consists of users that you create, groups that you create, client computers, organizational units, data, and everything else that goes along with the domain, all the other objects that are necessary for Active Directory to function. The same thing happens in domain B. You have all these objects that you create, and you also have domain controllers. What the global catalog server does is it keeps a copy, or it hosts a copy of all the objects that you create. The attributes for all those objects are stored in the global catalog server. Now, what do I mean by attributes? Let's say, for example, a user. You create a user in domain C. The user has attributes. Attribute would be the last name, the first name, the email address, that type of thing. All of that gets stored directly to the server that is the global catalog server. Now, why is this necessary? Well, let's look at the scenario again. Let us say that an object was created in domain B. That object now has to be replicated to domain C and domain A. What really happens is that the information first goes to the global catalog server. And then that information then is replicated back to the other domains. That's necessary because if, for example, I created a user in domain B and I changed the password for that user, that information, and then the user tries to log on while in domain C. Maybe that password information has not replicated to domain C as yet. And when that user tries to log on, and that user is in domain C, he might get an error. So what we do is send all those attributes to DC1, which would be the global catalog server, so that there is no error. Everything goes home first, which would be the global catalog server, DC1. It acts really like a phone book. If you want to do a search, you go to the phone book. The same thing happens within the forest. If somebody in domain C wants to search for a user's name, a user's last name, first name, email address, then the user will be directed to the server that is the global catalog server. Now, this global catalog server class does not contain all attributes for each object. Instead, the global catalog maintains what we call a subset of attributes. Just as the phone book will not have everything about us, you would have the phone number, you might have the address, but you wouldn't have the date of birth and other attributes. Well, it's the same way with the global catalog server. It maintains a partial set of attribute information for the objects, whether it be a computer object, a user object, a group object, whatever is created throughout the forest in any of the domains. Now, we need to bear in mind again that the global catalog server will be installed on the first domain controller within the domain. The other domain controllers can also be global catalog servers if we want them to, but that depends on your bandwidth within your organization, and it depends on whether or not you want to have traffic replicated between the domains. Some people say that a global catalog server takes up too much of your traffic. There's too much replication. But many organizations that I know opt to make every domain controller a global catalog server. So that is dependent again on replication traffic and network bandwidth. Now, what we want to find out is, how do you know whether or not your domain controller is a global catalog server? And if you wanted to remove the global catalog server from your domain controller, how would you go ahead and do that? And that's what we're going to look at right now. Before we actually look at where we would find this global catalog server, there's one other thing that I would want to mention to you. In a single domain environment where there's only one domain, all domain controllers should be configured to hold a copy of the global catalog server. However, in a multiple domain environment where you have more than one domain, like in the environment that we showed you a few moments ago, the infrastructure master. And you will hear us mention the infrastructure master in some sessions to come. But I want you to remember this fact. The infrastructure master, which is a role on a domain controller, should not be a global catalog server unless all the domain controllers in the domain are also global catalog servers. So if you have more than one domain and you're going to have the global catalog server on all of the domain controllers, then you can have the infrastructure master on the same server as the global catalog. But if you have multiple domains, then the infrastructure master should not be on a server that is a global catalog server. And we will talk more about that infrastructure master in another video. Right now, we're going to look and we're going to see how we would find out whether or not our server is a global catalog server. So we're here on the Server Manager dashboard screen. We want to click on Tools. We want to click on Active Directory, Sites and Services. Then you want to expand sites. You want to expand default first site by clicking. You want to expand servers. And you want to expand the London DC1 server. And you're going to see NTDS settings. What we want to do is to right click on NTDS settings and click on properties. Now, do you see where we have global catalog? There's a tick in that box, and that's how you know that your server is a global catalog server. Now, if you had a server and the server had a global catalog role on it, you would have to follow these steps and you would have to come here and you would have to untick or uncheck that box so that the tick is no longer there. So remember, to find out if your server is a global catalog server, you go to Active Directory Sites and Services, follow the steps in the video until you come to the properties of the NTDS settings. And that is where you will see that there's a tick and you will know that your server is indeed a global catalog server. Again, if you want to remove that role from your server, you will come to the properties of NTDS settings and you would remove that tick, apply, and say OK. In your lab exercise, you're going to be going through the same procedure of going to Active Directory Sites and Services and finding that setting where we would actually remove or add a server as a global catalog server. This is the end of this session. I want to thank you for listening.